collection, I see.
This is one that nobody else has.
For over half a century, Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford have stood as two of the most iconic figures in Hollywood, men who shaped the image of rugged masculinity, independence, and American cinema itself. But what most fans never knew was that behind the charm, mutual respect, and public smiles, there was a hidden story, a story Clint Eastwood kept to himself for decades. Now at 95, he's finally breaking his silence. In a rare, emotional interview, Clint opened up about his real relationship with Robert Redford, one that was far more complex than the public ever imagined. For years, fans assumed these two legends were close friends, bound by their shared legacy of westerns, drama, and directing brilliance. But Clint's latest confession paints a very different picture, one filled with tension, rivalry, and a quiet competition that defined much of their careers. Their paths crossed during Hollywood's golden years, both men commanding immense respect and attention. Yet, according to Clint, something happened between them that forever changed how he viewed Redford, a truth so startling that even his closest colleagues were shocked by what he revealed. What started as admiration turned into a decades-long standoff of pride, misunderstanding, and unspoken resentment. Now, as Clint Eastwood reflects on his life and legacy, he's choosing to set the record straight, to tell the truth about what really went on behind the scenes, why he distanced himself from Redford, and how time has changed his perspective on their complicated friendship. This isn't just another Hollywood feud. It's a story about two titans, their egos, their artistry, and the deep human truth that even legends can hold grudges they never meant to keep. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Hollywood was entering a new golden age, one that celebrated individuality, realism, and the rugged charm of anti-heroes. At the forefront of this movement were two names destined to become immortal, Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford. Both men, strikingly handsome and fiercely independent, embodied different sides of the same coin. Eastwood, the stoic gunslinger who said little but commanded every frame, and Redford, the golden boy with charisma, intellect, and moral conviction. For decades, fans and critics alike couldn't help but compare them. Two kings ruling the same kingdom in their own unique ways. But behind the mutual respect lay an undercurrent of quiet competition that would eventually turn into something far more personal. Their first indirect clash came in 1969, when Redford's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid became a massive hit. Around the same time, Eastwood was still defining himself in the American mainstream after his spaghetti western success in Italy. Hollywood insiders began asking, who's the real American hero, Eastwood's gunslinger or Redford's gentleman outlaw? That question lingered for decades. According to Eastwood, the rivalry wasn't something he wanted. It was something Hollywood created. Studio executives constantly pitted them against each other for the same roles. There were times, Eastwood once admitted in an interview, when I'd hear that Redford was being offered a script I'd already turned down, or vice versa. It was like they wanted us to compete even when we weren't trying. 2. Their paths finally crossed in person, during a Hollywood charity gala in 1973. Witnesses described the encounter as cordial but cold. Clint, tall and reserved, kept his trademark smirk, while Redford maintained his polished calm. They respected each other, said one insider, but there was a stiffness there, like two men who knew the room wasn't big enough for both. That same year, Redford starred in The Sting, which swept the Oscars, while Eastwood's High Plains Drifter marked his rise as a director. Both men were redefining the American male archetype, one through moral sophistication, the other through minimalist grit. Yet the competition between them only grew stronger. Directors whispered about their opposing work ethics, Eastwood's quiet, efficient, one-take approach versus Redford's thoughtful, detail-oriented precision. They were perfectionists in their own way, said a cinematographer who worked with both. But that's what made them rivals. They were both too good. By the 1980s, their careers had taken different paths. Redford became the face of environmental activism, and founded the Sundance Institute, cementing his legacy as a champion of independent filmmaking. Eastwood, meanwhile, evolved into one of Hollywood's most respected directors, crafting hard-edged masterpieces like Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby. Though their names often appeared in the same conversations, they never shared a film together, and that, according to Clint, was no accident. In his recent revelation, Eastwood admitted that several opportunities to work with Redford had come up, but he always turned them down. "We were too different," he said. "I respected him, but we had opposite ways of looking at the world. Maybe that's why it wouldn't have worked." His tone wasn't bitter, but reflective, the kind of wisdom that only comes from decades of experience. Industry veterans recall that Eastwood's decision to distance himself was partly professional, partly personal. There were whispers that Redford's polished image irritated Clint, who saw it as Hollywood's attempt to crown a perfect alternative to his own rough-edged persona. Redford, for his part, once hinted that Eastwood's stoicism came across as arrogance. "We're not enemies," he told a reporter in 1995, "but I wouldn't say we're close friends either." Still, even in their silent rivalry, there was mutual admiration. Clint reportedly attended a private screening of A River Runs Through It in the early 1990s and told a friend afterward, "He directed that one hell of a movie." Redford later returned the compliment when he said, "Clint Eastwood made the kind of films I always wanted to make. Bold, simple, and true. It was a rivalry born not of hatred, but of reflection. Two men seeing in each other what they might have been. Had life gone slightly differently? As the 1980s rolled into the 1990s, the quiet rivalry between Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford began to evolve into something deeper, something personal. The two men, though rarely in direct conflict, seemed to orbit each other's careers like distant planets, occasionally crossing paths, but never aligning. And according to Clint's recent confession, it was during this period that the real tension between them began to take root. At the heart of it all was creative pride. Both Eastwood and Redford had transitioned from acting into directing, a rare move in Hollywood at the time. Clint had already established himself as a powerhouse behind the camera, directing Pale Rider, 1985, Bird, 1988, and later the Oscar-winning Unforgiven, 1992. Redford, meanwhile, had stunned critics with Ordinary People, 1980, which won him the Academy Award for Best Director. Suddenly, these two icons weren't just competing as actors, they were competing as filmmakers. It was around this time that the two were reportedly considered for a major joint project. In 1991, Warner Brothers floated the idea of casting Eastwood and Redford together in a political thriller about two aging spies on opposite sides of the Cold War. It was an ambitious film that could have united two living legends on screen for the first time. But as Clint revealed years later, he turned it down almost immediately. "I didn't see the chemistry working," he said bluntly. "Redford's style was too clean, too polished. I needed grit, not glamour." That rejection, according to insiders, deeply offended Redford. Friends close to him said he felt slighted, as though Clint saw himself as the more authentic artist. "Bob took pride in his integrity," one producer recalled. He didn't play the Hollywood game either. But Clint's dismissal hurt him. He never forgot it. The divide between them widened when both men were nominated for major directing awards in the 1990s. When Clint's Unforgiven dominated the Oscars in 1993, some in Hollywood whispered that Redford was quietly resentful. A year later, Redford returned with Quiz Show, another critical triumph. And though both men publicly praised each other's work, industry insiders knew the rivalry was alive and well. In interviews, Clint often came across as guarded when Redford's name was mentioned. "He's good at what he does," he'd say curtly, before changing the subject. Redford, in contrast, took a subtler approach, occasionally mentioning Eastwood as a respected contemporary, though never with the warmth he extended to other peers. "They were two alpha wolves," one studio executive said. "They respected each other's hunt, but they didn't share the same territory." Privately, Eastwood later admitted that part of the rift stemmed from their philosophical differences. Redford was vocal about environmental issues, political activism, and human rights. Clint, on the other hand, preferred to stay quiet, keeping his opinions off the record. Bob always wanted to talk politics, Clint confessed in his recent statement. That wasn't my thing. I've always believed in action, not talk. Maybe that's why we didn't click. There was also a creative clash in how they viewed storytelling. Redford sought moral depth, social meaning, and symbolism. Eastwood chased emotional truth, stripped of pretension. They both wanted to tell real stories, but their definitions of truth were worlds apart. By the early 2000s, the tension between them had turned into mutual distance. When Redford received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Golden Globes in 1994, Eastwood didn't attend, despite being invited. When Clint received his own lifetime honor from the American Film Institute in 1996, Redford sent a short written tribute but skipped the ceremony. To outsiders, it looked like a professional courtesy. To insiders, it was a silent standoff. But despite the distance, both men seemed bound by an unspoken awareness. They needed each other. In a strange way, Clint and Redford defined each other's careers, said a veteran film historian. You couldn't talk about one without mentioning the other. They were like twin symbols of American masculinity, one rugged and raw, the other refined and introspective. Together, they represented both sides of the American dream. Looking back, Clint admitted that he sometimes regretted the divide. We could have made something great together, he said quietly. Maybe we were both too proud to admit it then, and as time would soon reveal, that unspoken pride would haunt both men far longer than either expected. As the years rolled on, the rivalry between Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford slowly faded from Hollywood gossip, replaced by something deeper and far more poignant: silence. Both men aged gracefully, retreating from the chaotic spotlight that once defined their lives. The world saw two cinematic giants still working, still respected and seemingly content. But according to Clint's recent revelation, beneath that calm exterior lingered a sense of unfinished business, a quiet regret that time could never quite erase. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, both Clint and Redford remained active in Hollywood, continuing to create films that reflected their evolving worldviews. Eastwood produced hard-hitting stories like Mystic River, Gran Torino, and American Sniper, powerful, masculine explorations of morality and consequence. Redford, meanwhile, pursued more introspective projects such as The Horse Whisperer and The Old Man and the Gun, films that mirrored his growing interest in redemption, memory, and aging. Their careers were moving in parallel once again, two old lions walking the same path but on opposite sides of the savannah. And yet, in those later years, the bitterness that once existed between them began to soften. Clint would occasionally mention Redford in interviews, his tone less guarded, his words more reflective. He's done a lot of good work, Clint admitted in one interview around 2019. He stuck to what he believed in, and that's something I've always respected, even when I didn't agree with it. Redford, too, seemed to mellow over time. When asked about Clint during the promotion of his final film, The Old Man and the Gun, 2018, he smiled faintly and said, "Clint's one of a kind. We took different roads, but we were driving toward the same truth." It was perhaps the most sincere acknowledgement of their shared legacy that either had ever made publicly. Behind the scenes, however, there were moments that hinted at a quiet reconciliation. In 2017, at a private Academy luncheon honoring legendary directors, the two men reportedly spoke for nearly 10 minutes, their first extended conversation in decades. According to witnesses, the exchange was respectful, warm, and tinged with nostalgia. It wasn't two rivals talking, one attendee said. It was two survivors, men who had lived long enough to understand what truly mattered. Clint later revealed that encounter changed something in him. "Time has a way of shrinking everything," he said softly. "All the things that used to matter, pride, competition, who won what, they start to look pretty small compared to what's behind you." By this stage in life, both Eastwood and Redford were facing the inevitable, the slow passage of time, the fading of fame and the growing awareness of mortality. Redford had announced his retirement from acting, while Clint continued to work, albeit at a slower pace. Yet both men shared the same unspoken truth. They had outlasted nearly everyone from their generation. They had become living symbols of an era that no longer existed. In one emotional interview near his 90th birthday, Clint reflected on the lessons of longevity. "You start looking back, wondering what you could have done differently," he said. "I think I spent too many years thinking I had something to prove. Maybe that's what drove me. And maybe that's what kept me apart from people I could have called friends." Though he didn't name Redford directly, those who knew the story understood exactly whom he was referring to. Redford, too, expressed similar sentiments in his later years. Speaking to The Hollywood Reporter, he admitted, "You realize the world doesn't remember who won what argument. It remembers how you made people feel. I hope I made peace with everyone I needed to." For both men, the years of distance had evolved into quiet reflection, not resentment, not rivalry, but understanding. The competition that once fueled them had given way to mutual recognition of the extraordinary lives they had. Let in when Clint finally opened up about the truth between them, decades after the tension first began. It wasn't to stir controversy. It was to set the record straight with peace in his heart. "I think we misunderstood each other," he said. "We were just two guys trying to tell stories in our own way. That's all there ever was." In their twilight years, Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford found themselves reflecting on parallel paths. Two men who had once been compared endlessly, now bound by a mutual respect that transcended any rivalry. Both had built their careers on integrity, independence, and a refusal to conform to Hollywood's expectations. Yet their ways of expressing that defiance couldn't have been more different. Eastwood was the stoic gunslinger, speaking in few words but making every moment thunder. Redford was the reflective dreamer, using his platform to tell stories that probed the human soul. When Clint revealed the shocking truth about Robert Redford, it wasn't scandalous. It was humbling. He admitted that he had always admired Redford's courage to pursue art over fame. "Robert was never about the noise," Clint said softly in a rare 2024 interview. "He built something real, something that lasts, not with explosions or headlines, but with heart." For a man like Eastwood, known for his quiet intensity, those words carried profound weight. Their relationship wasn't built on parties or collaborations. It was built on mutual recognition. When Redford directed Ordinary People in 1980 and won the Oscar, Clint privately sent a note of congratulations, later recalling, "I didn't need to be in the spotlight. I just respected what he stood for." Similarly, when Eastwood released Unforgiven in 1992, redefining the Western genre, Redford publicly praised it as a film made by a man who truly understands the silence of the West. They may have worked in different circles, but their spirits mirrored each other. Two rebels who refused to bend to Hollywood's commercial machine. Both men had endured personal pain as well. Eastwood had lost friends, seen relationships crumble, and faced criticism for his political and artistic choices. Redford had lost a son, struggled with health issues, and fought to keep his private life shielded from fame's glare. These hardships, instead of dividing them, drew them closer in understanding. Each knew what it meant to carry the loneliness of success, to stand at the top of the mountain and realize how cold it can be up there. When Eastwood spoke about Redford in his 90s, it was not with the bravado of a rival, but with the reverence of a peer who had seen everything. "We didn't need to compete," he said. "We were both just trying to tell the truth, in our own way." In that statement, Clint captured the essence of their legacy. Both men represented the last of Hollywood's true mavericks, artists who thrived on authenticity in a world that worships artifice. In the end, Clint's truth about Redford wasn't about secrets or feuds. It was about acknowledgement. He confessed that for decades he had drawn quiet inspiration from Redford's work. His environmental advocacy, his directorial depth, his calm defiance of fame. "He made being genuine look effortless," Clint remarked. "And that's something this town doesn't know how to value anymore. As both legends fade into the golden light of history, Their stories intertwine into something larger than rivalry, a shared reminder of a time when Hollywood was still built on grit, vision, and individuality. Their paths may have diverged, but their destinations were the same, creating art that endured, truth that echoed, and characters that would outlive them both. Now, at 95, Eastwood seems at peace with everything, his triumphs, his regrets, and his revelations. "Robert and I," he said in his final note about the matter, "we were just two sides of the same coin. He looked east, I looked west, but we were both chasing the same sunset. And perhaps, in the grand tapestry of Hollywood's history, that's the most honest truth of all. Two legends who defined their own eras, leaving behind not just films but philosophies of living. Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford will forever stand as beacons of authenticity in an industry that too often forgets what that word really means."